Okay, what's going on YouTube? This is PNG Media News back at you with another edition of the Concrete and Steel Chronicles. Today you are in for a real big treat. I got Damion Porter. He got a pretty happening YouTube channel. He's just gonna give us a whole rundown. He's gonna tell us the story. So without further ado, well, first of all, thanks for coming in, Brother Porter. I really appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
No doubt, no doubt. So tell the people about where you come from. Where did your story begin?
Well, my story, it begins in California, Watts in South Central California. That's where I grew up at. I was born at a hospital on Western, and my mother moved to Watts in 1978 when I was 4 years old, and I stayed over there until I was 12 years old, and I moved to 110th in Vermont, which is Hoover territory, and stayed there for some time until I got into some trouble and went to camp at the age of 14.
Okay. So now Watts, now that's a pretty historical area, the whole Watts riots and stuff like that. Growing up, what was the community like in the aftermath of all of the Watts riots and stuff like that? What was it like for youth in Watts?
Well, Watts at the time, in the early 80s, the 90s, and even now, it was destitute. And, there's a lot of inner conflict, a lot of inner turmoil whenever you have a catacomb, grotto, or ghetto like Watts, where everyone is trying to get ahead and get out of the situation that they're in. Oftentimes that angst and anger turns towards one another. And so there's a lot of inner conflict in Watts with Black people at the time, fresh off of the riots, and everyone was still trying to find their way in this society. So it was complicated. It was challenging because there was a lot of violence and a lot of people, again, trying their best to claw themselves out of that situation.
Okay.
Which was a destitute situation that they was in, a desperate situation, an urgent situation to get out of that ghetto.
Do you ever spend any time in Nickson Gardens? That's in Watts, correct?
Yeah, Nickson Gardens is in Watts. And well, yeah, because I have family from over there, Nickson Gardens. And so I was over there sometimes. I know a lot of them guys that's over there as well. Same thing for the PJs and the Jordan Downs. Everywhere over there, I'm familiar with for the most part.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned into moved over to Hoover territory. Now, before we delve into that, I just want to clear up a couple of things and just get it on record. I know it's probably already out there. But okay, first of all, a lot of people in Chicago, when they hear Hoover Deuce or whatever, they thinking, oh, they disciples because of Larry Hoover. Does the Hoover Deuce have anything to do with Larry Hoover?
You said Hoover Deuce. What is Hoover Deuce?
Okay. Well, just Hoovers, period. Because I don't know, maybe I just heard that somewhere. I'm not sure if I get the terminology, but just the Hoovers in general. Do they have anything to do with Larry Hoover of Chicago?
No.
Okay. So who are the Hoovers in California named after? Where did they get that name from?
Just the street.
Okay. So it was a street, not a person.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Was there ever a person? I also heard the name of Hoover Washington. Was that a real person of significance or anything like that?
No, sir. You may be referring to Raymond Washington.
Raymond. Okay. All right.
He was the co-founder of the Crips.
Okay.
And the Hoovers were accused of unaliving him.
Okay.
Where you got that sort of information crossed up.
Okay, so I'm getting it crossed up. Okay, so to clarify, the Hoovers weren't named after a person. There was no Hoover Washington. They have no connection to Chicago Larry Hoover. They're named after a street in Los Angeles.
Correct.
Okay.
Same way that most gangs in Los Angeles are just named after street, Grape Street, Watts Crips. Their street is called Grape Street.
Okay. All right.
That's near their neighborhood. The Menlos, they have a street called Menlo, etc.
Okay. And then second question, are the Hoovers, are they part of the Crip umbrella, or were they ever part of the Crip umbrella? What's the whole story behind that?
Well, the story is pretty public for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
The Hoovers started off as Crips or as Hoover Groovers, and then, yes, became Hoover Crips until about 1989, where the Hoovers then broke off and became Hoover Criminals.
Okay.
And not Crips. But even at that juncture, there were still some Hoover factions, in particular the Phi Deuce Hoovers, who were still Hoover Crips. Now the 107 Hoovers have went back to being Crips, and there's still some factions who claim Crip.
Okay.
And individuals who claim
Crip. Gotcha. All right. So tell me about growing up in that neighborhood, because you coming in your teen years. Like what got you into the street life? I mean, tell me about that.
Well, the same thing that gets most young black men and brown men and white men, for that matter, into the street life. And that's just a lack of direction, a lack of guidance, a lack of a male figure. And that's the environment to which I was brought into, with being surrounded by such desperation, infested with gang violence, illegal substances, etc., and everyone doing whatever is necessary to get ahead. If you don't have the proper guidance, you will fall prey to that sort of environment. And that's what happened to me. I was set by such surroundings, and without the personal strength to overcome it, to surmount the obstacle, I succumbed to it. It was like, that's all that I saw. That's all that I knew. I saw people who I thought were being successful running the street and dealing in illegal narcotics and such. And I thought that I can become successful as well, because I didn't have any other role model to aspire to, any other paradigm to aspire to. And so that's what I aspired to instead.
Okay.
I have my trying to help to steer people in a different direction.
Okay. All right. Now, was there ever a point, since you did come from Watts, and that's like a lot of Bloods over there, was there ever a choice, like, man, do I want to roll with them, or I want to roll with the Hoovers? Was there ever like a...
It's a lot of Crips and Watts.
Okay.
It's a lot of Crips and it's a lot of Bloods. And I was faced with the decision, like most young people growing up in these neighborhoods. You're surrounded, for the most part, by other neighborhoods. Because, we're all congested down there in Los Angeles. One set can be right here, and literally a block away, there's another gang set. And so you're oftentimes faced with the choice, since you're surrounded by so many gangs, you're faced with the choice as to whether or not you're going to join this gang or the gang that's around the corner, because they're everywhere. And sometimes, you have family ties, and which influences the decision. But me, I wasn't necessarily faced with any challenging decisions. I grew up in a Crip neighborhood, and when I moved over there to 110th in Vermont, I was 12 years old. And so I was heavily influenced at that time by the gang culture, and with an absent male figure in the home, it was rather easy for me to then take to the street.
Okay. Now I want to talk about street dynamics a little bit. Now, like in Chicago, well, back when I was coming up, it was all about how you wore your hat. You wore it to the left, it was with the People Nation. You wore it to the right, with the Folks Nation. Colors didn't really come into play. So going during your era, like, first of all, how did you know when someone was banging? you know, but how'd you tell them between a gangbanger from just another urban youth, you know, who dresses like, you know, urban? How'd you know someone was banging?
Oftentimes, uh, you do not know the difference.
Okay.
You know, oftentimes you cannot tell the difference. Down in LA, for the most part, it was, we went off of gang colors. You know, you would hear people say, "Oh man, don't wear that over here in that neighborhood. Wear the red, don't wear the blue, don't wear the orange, etc." And so we were really distinguished by colors. But if you dress obviously in a certain way, uh, in an urban way, a hip hop sort of way, whether you have a certain color on or not, people may mistake you for a gang member. Oftentimes, these people who do not gang bang are approached in Los Angeles, and I'm sure all over the world, when they wear certain attire in a certain gang neighborhood.
Okay. So, so like, say a guy coming through your neighborhood. Now, say he's a Crip from Watts or something. You know, has no real connection to your neighborhood. And y'all stop and talk, you know, ask him where he's from. Is that automatically going to be a problem? Like what people was it? I guess what I'm asking: can someone come through your neighborhood without being in your gang? If they're from they're a Crip, but not necessarily an enemy, are they still free to travel through your neighborhood? How does that work?
Well, typically I wouldn't advise for you to be wandering in anyone's neighborhood that you are not from, because
Okay.
you know people may wonder why you're doing this. Now, in particular, when you're talking about a gang like the Hoovers, I would especially advise you not to be walking around there if you're not from there, because the Hoovers just have so many enemies, and most people consider it the most hated gang on the planet Earth. I certainly do. And with that being the situation, everyone is always on alert. So if you come over, you're not a known face. No one is going to know what you're over there for. Who sent you? And so I just would not advise it.
Okay. Right. But say it was just a circumstance like I'm just pulling over to go in this liquor store. I'm coming in. I say I'm Watts Crip. Is that enough to get me a pass? Because we have no known, like we're not enemies or nothing. Because I live
Yes,
far away.
absolutely. If you're not an opposition, you will be fine. You know, but if you are in opposition, then no, it wouldn't be wise or sagacious to come into any neighborhood that you are in opposition to.
Okay.
I can go to certain neighborhoods, to the liquor store or whatever. In fact, oftentimes when I'm driving up the street with my comrades, with one of my homies, and we can't go to that store, or don't go over there. They be hanging out over. We already know not to go there to these guys' neighborhood. Why would we do that if they're the opposition? Now, if they're not the opposition, then we should be able to go over there. We're not enemies. We don't have a problem.
Okay.
Now, if you approach me and I tell you where I'm from, and you still have a problem with it, with me being in your neighborhood, and we're not enemies, then yeah, well, that's a problem.
Okay.
Or then now it can become a problem. Now we can end up being enemies. Now it can end up being a war because of the way that you approach me in your neighborhood. And I have a right to be over there because I'm not disrespecting you by being over here, because we're not enemies.
Okay. Gotcha. And then say, for example, you know, you're somewhere like downtown Los Angeles, that's like nobody's territory, and then you see two factions come together, you know, past each other. We both going to the movie or whatever. Does that usually turn into a problem when you're in neutral territory, but it's two different neighborhoods?
Well, you know, it depends on the two neighborhoods, you know,
Okay.
whether or not they get along or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it's going to come down to. But if you're in neutral territory, then for the most part, you're okay.
Okay.
It's just when you step into a designated area that you're really not supposed to step into, that you're asking for problems.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And All right. All right. You're a teen. You gave, you listed the reasons like, lack of direction and stuff like that that led you to the street life. So when you were out there on the street, like what type of things were you into? Like what was your street trade?
Robbery.
Okay.
Uh, that's what I went to prison for. That's what I went to CYA for. Uh, I went to camp for essentially an attempted robbery. It was just robbery, robbery, robbery. Uh,
Gotcha.
that was what I was prone to, and that's what when I last got out of prison in April 2022, I got out of prison for a robbery.
Okay. All right. So you out there robbing and then you get caught. So you make that first trip to CYA. Okay, take me through that. What was that experience like? Like when you first got there, were you hit up and asked where you were from? Were you automatically placed somewhere by the guards? What's the dynamic of CYA?
Well, CYA, like uh, most, if not all, facilities, is dehumanizing.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, particularly to a youth who is not fully developed mentally, physically, and otherwise. It can be a traumatic experience, because you go through some of the same things that you go through in prison. You're stripped out, strip searched, and you're in your cells, often depending on which CYA you're in, and it can be challenging for someone who hasn't acquired the necessary strength yet to deal with life. Uh, and at the age of 15, 16, 17, and 18 years old, which is the normal age for people who are in CYA, they're not fully developed yet, fully, capable sometimes of dealing with the incarceration. For me, I just steeled myself and told myself that I was going to stay strong and deal with it because I was guilty of the crime that had led me to that institution. And I just tried to keep a positive mindset. But the police there in CYA, the officers there, some of them, they do treat you like a human being because you are young, and maybe some of them see their child in you. But then there are others still, just like correction officers in prison, who do not see you as one worthy of respect because of your infraction. And so it can be a challenging situation being incarcerated at that age, being in CYA, and it was for me. But I stayed strong and just began to read and think positively, and told myself that uh, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. That in the end, I'll be okay.
Now at CYA, did those at that that young level, did you have the same prison politics with like the race and all that type of stuff, or was it just really just gang banging and street politics?
Was it's a mixture of both. There are street politics, of course, gang politics, and CYA, uh, and there are race politics as well. Talked about it on my channel oftentimes. That in Paso Robles, CYA, uh, it was very racist. The unit that I was on was very racist. Dubs also talked about it because him and I had a fight there on that same unit.
Hmm.
And so CYA, the politics are not as advanced as they are in prison because everyone there is young. Southsiders still have their structure there in CYA. They still have their rules, like they don't eat after blacks. They can't drink coffee after a black person has drunk out of the cup.
Hmm.
This stuff, and so the racism is still there on both sides, all the way around. And the gang politics, of course, is also there. There's a lot of gang culture, a lot of gang fights, and not many stabbings in CYA because, again, the politics and the people are not as advanced as they are in prison, but there is still a lot of violence.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. So now I want to fast forward a little bit. So you go from CYA, at some point you end up in the county jail. Now, has your CYA experience prepared you for that culture in the county jail?
Not necessarily. In some ways, I suppose it did, just dealing with being incarcerated, already knowing what incarceration is like and being deprived of freedom. And so mentally, I wasn't surprised at some of the things that was going on in the county jail or just having my freedom once again usurped. Nevertheless, the politics are totally different because you're dealing with grown people, very grown men. The Los Angeles County Jail, many of them have already been to prison. Some have come from prison. Most are on their way to prison. And so they have a prison mindset, a prison level 4-yard mindset, and politics that they govern themselves with that they derive from a level 4 prison. And so the county jail's politics are a lot more different and astute than, say, a CYA, still not as advanced and strict as the prison politics.
Okay. So take me through, like, when you first get there, like, how do you get your housing classification? Do you tell the guards, hey, I'm with this group, and they put you there, or how does that play out? Where you're housed at?
Well, it sort of used to be like that, you know. And county jail, they had the Crip module, had the Blood module, you know, and so come in, you would identify yourself to the police, say that you are a Blood, or they check your tattoos and see that you are a Blood or that you are a Crip. And then they would, if you were a Crip, they put you in the Crip module. If you're a Blood, they put you in the Blood module. Nowadays, since they don't necessarily have a Blood and or a Crip module, you're just essentially, for the most part, classified by your crime and thus your points, and they'll just put you in whatever module, depending on the time that you're facing and the crime that you have. And the module is going to be mixed with all sorts of people, all sorts of different gangs.
Hmm. Now, back in the day when they were putting you like in Crip modules and Blood modules, being that there's so many different type of Crips, did they all put those differences aside since we're in jail, or did that some of that street stuff carry over into there?
Well, it carried over. There was still a lot of violence in the Crip module. Crips assaulting other Crips from opposite factions. But, you know, whenever there was a situation with the Bloods or something, then they would all then put their differences to the side and come together in some of the same ways that Blacks oftentimes have a propensity to come together when something happens, even though we're fractured and factionalized before then. But when something happens and we all feel like we need to respond, riot, or retaliate, and then we tend to come together momentarily before we go back to the separation.
Okay, gotcha. Now, at the county level, was there a lot of racial fights there, or was that mostly at the prison level?
Well, no, it's more in the county than it is in prison.
Oh, really? Okay.
Actually, I speak a lot about it on my channel. The riots between the Blacks and the Southsiders, which is an ongoing thing to this day, actually. And they started about the end of 1993 when, I don't know, I guess the Southsiders got a green light from their hierarchy to attack the Blacks. Not only a green light, but a command to attack the Blacks. And they began to do so on the street and in the Los Angeles County Jail, particularly in Wayside. And the riots began to happen frequently in Wayside, where, for the most part, most of the time, the Blacks were on the defense. The Southsiders were initiating these riots and these attacks until a group of us Blacks, and I was indeed one of them, I have receipts. We got together and decided that we were going to have to start attacking the Southsiders, you know, so as to send a message that we're not going to sit back and be, you know, ping pongs for you, pinatas for you to just sit back and poke on us. We're going to have to start initiating this and be the aggressors.
Let me ask. I want to talk a little bit more about that. You know, there's all type of stories and propaganda around YouTube. Now, from your perspective, I want you to set it straight. Was it a thing of blacks being scared of Mexicans, or just blacks like just not really wanting to fight? Or what was the whole thing about when y'all were on the defensive, from your perspective?
But in which situation was that?
Well, you mentioned like early before some of you all got together and started going on the defensive. You mentioned that a lot of times the blacks were on the defensive, meaning that they were just responding to they were responding when they get attacked. They were initiating. And was that out of fear, or was that out of just we don't fucking feel like we just trying to program? What was that about?
Well, it was really just for one. After a while, it was just because of a lack of organization, a lack of a direction and guidance, a
Mm.
lack of right people there explaining why it was important to go on the offensive. The second thing was that the blacks at the time, they didn't have a problem with the Southsiders.
Mm.
Not initiating any of these riots, the Southsiders were not at first either until they got the command to do so.
Okay.
Until they got the call to do so. So they had a beef, they had a gripe. The blacks did not have a gripe. They had a gripe. And so when the riots started happening, they were the ones kicking it off because they were the ones that had gotten the word to kick it off. The blacks were in the dark about this at first. They didn't know that they had got some sort of command to start attacking the blacks until they eventually caught on with them. These riots keep happening, and it's the Southsiders that keep on attacking us. What's going on here? And then, obviously common sense dictates that they have some sort of green light and that it's time for us to nip this in the bud and start attacking them first, give them some sort of green light as to garner some sort of respect from them and their hierarchy.
Okay, gotcha.
So we then began to attack them. So it wasn't out of fear. It wasn't because blacks were trying to program. It was just out of a lack of knowledge, of understanding that they were attacking us and why,
Mm.
and understanding the importance of us initiating attacks then, since they have this sort of green light to attack us in these riots, the importance of us not just responding and being defensive, but going on the offensive and attacking them.
Okay.
And that's what we began to do.
All right. So in other words, blacks did do their thing. You know, whether it was on the anytime it jumped off, they did their thing basically.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha. Now, moving on from the county, well, I'm gonna come back to the county later. 'Cause I want to ask you about a particular story, but I want to stay a little bit in the sequence. Now, you get to prison. Now, how long was it between your county stays that you actually went to a real state pen?
Uh, well, the first time it was only about 2 months actually that I stayed in the county jail because I just immediately took a deal. That was in 1994
94.
for 4 years for the robbery that I was in on. But the very last time I stayed in the county jail for 4 years, fighting.
Damn, 4 years?
Yeah, because I ended up going to trial twice. I had a hung jury the first time, and then it
Okay.
took 9, 10 months to get back to trial again for the second time. It kept being delayed and put off. And after the second trial, where I was eventually found guilty, I then was trying to get a retrial, and that took almost a year as we were filing, motions and paperwork, really trying to delay this and stall because they wanted to give me a life sentence for the crime. I did not want to get a life sentence.
Right.
Like a life sentence. So I was trying everything that I could to get out of the situation.
Okay. So when you go to that county, after your 2 month stay, I mean, I'm sorry, when you leave the county after that 2 month stay and go to the pen, what was your mindset like? Were you like, I'm a big time gangster now, I'm going to the big leagues? Or were you like, oh, what the fuck am I in for? How did you process that experience?
Well, at that time, actually, and probably unfortunately, I was not afraid.
Mm.
And I probably should have been more afraid if they would have stopped me from returning to prison as much as I did. But I was somewhat nervous, just anxious as to just more anticipatory, trying to anticipate what was going to happen once I got there. But Of course, I'd already heard stories. My uncle had been in prison. My OG homies had been in prison. They had sort of prepared me, if you will, for what prison was like, what prison life was like, just growing up hearing some of their politics and some of their stories. So I sort of knew what to expect, but you just don't know until you experience it yourself, until you get there. So I was anticipating violence and heavy politics, but that's not necessarily what I encountered when I first got there, because I went to a level 2 to Avenal State Prison, which is dorm living and totally different than a level 4. Then went from Avenal to a level 3 to Corcoran, which was a lot more like prison than Avenal and a lot more violent. And I was getting a better idea of what real prison was like being in Corcoran, but none of it really hit me and came crashing down until I hit a level 4 yard in High Desert. And that's when I really found out what prison really was.
Okay. Now going more into that, what do you mean by that? What did you experience there that made it really like, damn, this is prison?
Well, as I've talked about before on my channel, High Desert was, and still is considered the most violent prison in California. Some
Even
people,
worse than Pelican Bay?
I was about to see, some people think it's Pelican Bay just because Pelican Bay is the most famous prison
Okay.
in California. And that's why that's the first thing comes out to see Pelican Bay. Pelican Bay is the most famous prison, but it is not the most violent. Even
Okay.
people who have been to Pelican Bay will admit that High Desert is indeed the most violent. Now you can put Pelican Bay second, run them neck to neck with Calipatria or something. But High Desert, there are more unalivings there, more stabbings there than anywhere in California. It is extremely violent. The politics there are very serious. Each group there is very serious. I've said before on my channel on many of occasions that High Desert is where I first began to respect the white guys, the white boys, as it related to prison, because they're in the Los Angeles County Jail. The white boys were known for being having their manhoods taken, for being robbed, beat up all of the time, and it got so bad for them on the main line that they had to put them in their own module, their own dorm at one point. And so this is sort of the picture and the vision that I had of white boys in jail being overtaken by big black guys, or even Southsiders or whatever, being punked by Southsiders. But until I got to High Desert State Prison, and there I saw the white boys very structured, very organized, and extremely violent. They were unaliving one another, any infraction, and they were saving face. They were not playing any games. And the same can be said and must be said for essentially every group that was there in High Desert. The Southsiders were very strong and structured and were stabbing a lot of their people. The Norteños coexisted on the yard with the Southsiders. There are a few that do this. High Desert was one of them, where the Norteños and the Southsiders and the Soreños can coexist on the yard together, even though they are at that time sworn enemies. So in order to keep the peace amongst the two groups, they had to really police themselves and make sure that everyone in their own group was following the rules and the protocols so as not to cause a clash or conflict with one another. And because of that, everyone was very strict in their own faction. If any Norteño got out of line in any sort of way, the Norteños would crash him viciously. And the same said for the Southsiders. The blacks there, though fractured and factionalized, oftentimes came together when it related to another race. And the blacks there were also very strong in political, some very strong dudes, some very OG strong dudes from their neighborhoods that were there in High Desert that were reputables. And really didn't play any games. And so if you got out of line in high desert, if you transgressed or flouted a rule or protocol, you can expect to be viciously, brutally removed from the yard.
Now, is it true that in high desert, on most levels, or even most level for us for this matter, that there's a no hands policy? You gotta beef with someone, you gotta handle it with a knife. Is that true or a myth?
Well, for the most part, no hand policies, uh, they're not necessarily verbalized.
Okay.
It's understood that that's what it is. And in high desert, you'd never really hear anyone say, well, no hands on. But you'll just see that via the actions.
Mm.
Now, when it's dealing with someone from your own faction, then oftentimes it would be a hands-on unless he did something that merited a weapon. But other than that, it would be let's say a 2-on-1. A Hoover did something that was unbecoming of a Hoover, then he would be attacked without a weapon by 2 Hoovers.
Okay. Gotcha. Now I want to get back to the whites a little bit. You may or not be able to answer this about their politics, but in high desert, did they fall under one umbrella? 'Cause I heard there was the Woodpile, there's actually no riders, skinheads. How did they all come together, or they still had their separate factions but operated under the same politics?
Well, they all pretty much came together.
Mhm.
They stuck together, but they had different factions as well.
Okay.
They have the skinheads and, like you said, the low riders and etc. And oftentimes they jockey for position and for superiority amongst themselves.
Okay.
They're in prison and out on the street. Everyone is the same.
Mhm.
Everyone is factionalized and has their own gang and is proud of their own gang and thinks that their gang is superior. In Los Angeles County Jail, the police officer, the deputies who were found out to have gangs there, the so-called 3,000 floor boys, which were the police that worked on the 3,000 floor, and it only came out because they had attacked one another at the work inside of a bar. The 3,000 boys versus the 2,000 floor boys. You got the Yankees versus the Red Sox, and when you see one person, the pitcher hit someone, and the hitter attacks the pitcher, you see the benches clear out where both teams come out and square off with one another and oftentimes throw blows with one another because they believe that their team that they're playing for is more superior than the other team. The Democrats get into it with the Republicans all the time. Sometimes it even leads to violence. The sheriffs think that they're better than the Los Angeles Police Department, than the LAPD. Every faction of society, every aspect of society, every corner of society has their own factions that they think is more superior than the other.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now,
is that the gangs get a bad name for the same thing that everyone does, including even professional basketball, baseball, soccer, etc.
that's definitely true. Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. Most of the time, from your experience, most of the time when the blacks got into the Southsiders, would the whites automatically ride with them? Was that like a standard policy, or that kind of depending on where you were that happened?
Well, for the most part, it depended on where you were. Oftentimes, when the blacks get into it, the Southsiders, it'd just be the blacks and the Southsiders. There have been situations, where the Southsiders have had the whites' backs or have let it be known that they had their backs in certain situations and vice versa. But sometimes those two groups get into it with one another, as well, the Southsiders and the whites. So it's not mandatory that they ride together. It depends on the situation. Oftentimes, especially there in the Los Angeles County Jail, it's only 1 or 2, 3 whites in the module or the dorm anyway. So they can't have anyone's back because they're not locked up.
Okay. Now I want to ask you questions about different, like a lot of questions about just different events. Okay. Has there ever been any cases where you, from your experience, where you, the Norteños, had to rock together?
The blacks and the Norteños?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, I was listening to a Northaniel not long ago, I believe on his channel, and was saying how the blacks had come through for them on many of occasions, had given them weapons, and on other occasions had told the Southsiders that they had the Northaniels their backs. If you're going to attack, the Northaniels, then you can expect the blacks to get involved, because the Northaniels may have been outnumbered in that situation by the Sureños, and the Sureños were clearly about to get the best of them, and the blacks stood up and had the Northaniels' backs. This has happened on more than one occasion, which is why some blacks were a little disillusioned with the whole coming together of the Northaniels and the Southsiders.
Right. Now, what about your relationship with the others? You had any incidents where either you rode with the others or had to battle the others, which are usually Asians?
Well, the others are oftentimes with us. They're oftentimes with the blacks, but sometimes they're not. And this is why I've often said that they shouldn't be with us anywhere in any situation, because I don't know when they're riding with us and when they're not. And since there's a question mark there, then they should be disallowed to be a part of our car, as far as I'm concerned, because sometimes they're with us. I've been in situations where they'll ride with the Southsiders against the blacks. They're over there on their side of the day road. They think they're too good for blacks, like every group does, And so, and then when it's convenient for them, sometimes they'll ride with the blacks. They'll be over there on the black side, when oftentimes the other groups would not accept them. Now, this is not all of them. This is not all of the others. Some of them naturally like blacks, are more comfortable with black people and feel more comfortable with supporting us and our cause and our car. But you have others yet still who think that, who really just use blacks for protection and for a car, for somewhere to belong. And they don't really respect us either. They just use us.
Okay. All right. And
I just call it out.
right. And speaking of that, I also understand that in California, there's a lot of like Asian, Samoan, Crip gangs. Your Crips on the street, but when they get to prison, they take their race above being Crip. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, there are a lot. Well, if there are Crips on the street, then I believe they should be Crips in jail or prison or wherever they're at. That's what they are, or that's what they are. But yeah, sometimes they come to jail or come to prison, and they click up based on ethnicity instead of gang. But oftentimes that's just also because they understand that if they're Crips, they're going to be riding and hanging out with the blacks, because there's, Crips are black. And at the end of the day, they don't respect us either, and don't want to be associated with us in that way behind the walls, because they think that we're low on the totem pole, like the rest of the country believes. So once again, they too are just hiding behind Crip gangs, using Crip to make themselves comfortable with blacks on the street. But then when they go to jail, it's a different story. You have to pick a side.
Now, next I just want to ask you, because now you also hear that blacks are disorganized, they're fractionalized. But I heard that in some prisons they've had some seriously tight Crips, some seriously tight blood machines where they function, where their structure can rival any other racial structure. Have you ever experienced that in seriously tight Crip machines or blood machines?
Well, yes, absolutely. There are some very strong ones, and yes, generally speaking, blacks are not well structured, not well organized, not just in prison, but on the street as well. In fact, this has been the biggest obstacle that has stood in the way to black freedom, is our inability to unify, to unite and become one. And that carries over to prison as well. And this is why also in prison, we don't have the respect and resources that we should, because we're too factionalized and go at it too much with one another. And at the end of the day, no one respects that. But there are some situations, some cars, some factions that are very well-oiled machines, very structured, very organized, and you cannot infiltrate them. So in general, the Blacks are not well organized, are not well structured as it relates to prison, or even, again, here on the street. But there are some factions inside of prison are very organized, that are Black, that are very organized and structured. And then you have some prison yards where all of the Blacks are well structured and organized.
Okay, all right. So at the end of the day, contrary to the narrative, Blacks not sitting around just being victims.
No, Blacks are not sitting around being victims. Blacks, when something happens, oftentimes is when Black people inside of prison come together and move as one and respond to any situation that is race related.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We get about 15 minutes left, and I want to close off. We're talking about the person you are, your transformation, but I want to step into some controversial waters real quick. Okay, the BGF, your thoughts on them, and why didn't they become like MA and have like all the Blacks under the umbrella?
Well, the BGF was a strong group, a strong organization. They was really derailed by gangs. That's really what undermined their strength and authority, was really the Crips and Bloods. When they came about, they really helped to dilute the BGF. And also Comrade George Jackson's death in August of 1971 helped to water down the BGF some, because he was so structured and organized and had them so structured and organized. But the BGF was a very formidable group, one to be respected, because just the fact that they put their lives on the line for a certain cause, and some of them lost their lives for this cause. And it was all really in the name of Black love, Black freedom. And so because of that, they automatically garner my respect.
Okay. Now, piggybacking off that, Hugo Yogi Pinell's death. I know that's like a long 3-4 hour story, and that's like a lot of history behind that. But in general, from my understanding, he was let out of the shoe not too long after him being out the shoe. He was murdered by the AB. His murder was ordered by the AB. There was a riot that took place, but immediately took place. But as far as any type of going after the hierarchy who ordered his murder hasn't taken place. Is that it in a nutshell, or is I got it all wrong?
No, you have it all right. Actually, yeah, that is it in a nutshell. And I'll just say here briefly, as I've said on my channel before, it's really despicable. I heard Nina Simone. I saw a clip on Black, beautiful Nina Simone a few days ago, and she was saying that she blamed Black people for Malcolm X's death because she said that they did not protect him. She said that she blamed Black people for Martin Luther King's death because Black people did not protect him. She said because Black people are willing to die, but they are not willing to kill. This is a Black woman saying this, a soundbite, a bar, that Black people are willing to die, but they are not willing to kill. And that's the problem. Well, yes, we are. Just one another. We're willing to kill just one another. We're willing to kill when it comes to one another. Hugo Pinell's death should have been met with an eye for an eye. Whoever ordered it, whoever they believe ordered it, anyone associated with them should have been attacked and unalived. George Zimmerman, who unalive, brutally. Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old black man, black kid and boy who was in his own neighborhood and then made a mockery of his unaliving. He should have been unalive.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. And last one.
But not a response to Hugo assassination, not a proper response. There was a riot right then and there when it happened. Some blacks responded right then and there, but clearly they did not have proper protection on him, because there's no way that the people that got to him should have been able to get to him to begin with.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, final one. The Pelican Bay Riot. Now, I understand that was like one of the worst riots in history, the big one where the Sureños attacked the blacks. Now, what type of shockwaves that into the prison? 'Cause I understand there was no retaliation after that, but what was the aftermath of that?
Well, I've talked to you about it before on my channel. There was some aftermath, and there was a bit of a retaliation, if you will. Other things were happening over that. And when these other incidents transpired, the blacks had the Pelican Bay Riot in the forefront of their mind as they initiate these other situations in other prisons. And so there was somewhat of a response, but not a well enough response, not an organized response, not an organized and structured retaliation. And again, this is the problem. This is the problem with black people. We're not organized, structured enough, and we're unwilling to do what is necessary to other people, but we're oftentimes willing to do it to one another. So, the Pelican Bay Riot, I recall it clearly. People were upset, as I've said before on my channel. People were upset about it because they felt like the Southsiders had lured the blacks to sleep by saying that they were not going to attack, and then out of nowhere attacked and caught the blacks slipping. But at the end of the day, the blacks were slipping, and they should not have been slipping. They should have been prepared. They should have had weapons. They knew that it was tension on the yard. They knew why it was tension on the yard. And if they had foresight and vision, they should have known that eventually it was going to kick off. But it reverberated around the prison system. You had blacks. It helped in some ways black people in prison, because blacks became more organized after the Pelican Bay Riot. They were more structured, and they began to understand after the Pelican Bay Riot that if there is tension in the air with another race, particularly with the Southsiders, that you cannot wait around and plot and plan. You have to just go on the offensive and take care of business, because you can best believe that they are plotting and planning.
Gotcha. Okay. Now I want to fast forward. Okay, now you got out in 2022. Now I listen to your channel a lot. I mean, you are well spoken, intelligent, almost like a college professor listening to you sometimes. Now, how did you transform from being a street guy to robbing and stuff like that, having to do all the stuff you had to do just to stay alive in prison, riots, stabbing, fighting? How did you transform from that to the person that you are today?
Well, thank you, first of all. And secondly, I'm not sure how much I have transformed.
Okay.
I'm in the process. I'm in the process of making that transformation. I am trying to evolve as a man and as a person daily. But at the end of the day, I just came to realize that the street life is unfulfilling, it's unloving, it's merciless, and that it really leads to nothing but destruction, death, and prison. And there's no love, there's no loyalty there. And why would I continue to choose that when I would rather have myself in a situation where I'm around people who are not cutthroat, who do have a modicum of morality, who do want to love one another and respect one another as human beings on this earth. And I am now geared towards that direction more than I am towards an unfulfilling, destructive street life or prison life that leads to nothing that is going to be conducive to success, but instead, again, just leads to destruction. And so I decided to to implement steps to change myself, to transform my life, and to no longer live that sort of low bottom lifestyle where I was devoid of ethics and morality, and just decided that I was done with prison. Certainly didn't want to go back there ever again, having been in there the vast majority of my life, and understood and still understand that in order to avoid that, then certain changes are in order.
Mhm. Gotcha. And so what's next for you? Because you got your YouTube channel is pretty popular. What do you have in the works? Do you ever plan to write a book or anything like that? What's next for Damion Porter?
Well, thank you. Well, yes, it's not that popular. Not yet. I'm working on it. I'm trying to get it there. There's a lot of stuff that I do, a lot of stuff that I have to do. But yes, I do indeed plan on writing a book. A lot of people have asked me to do. A lot of my supporters and subscribers, they took me to write a book, and they said that they would be the first to read it. And there's a lot that I want to get off my chest. I really haven't been able to do it on the channel, to put it in content form. I believe that sitting down writing about it will be cathartic, and that I could convey a message that would help keep the youth out of this, to avoid some of the situations that I found myself in.
Gotcha. Okay. I hope you do, because I know I'll be the first one to read it too. I'll be willing to proofread and anything, help you edit any of that. Because you definitely, like I said, I really listen to you a lot, and you be spitting some real stuff. Like you be on that college professor level. So I definitely hope you follow through with that book thing.
Absolutely.
So as we close, any last words you want to mention and shout out, anything like that? Shout the channel out. How can people find you? Shout out all your social medias and all that.
Thank you. Well, I mean, just subscribe to my channel, The Inside Story with Damion Porter on YouTube. My Instagram is Damion L. Porter, and my Facebook is just Damion Porter. Yeah, and I just want to shout out my guy Dubs. He always has been there for me and helped me with my YouTube when I first got started. He has a YouTube channel, and go check him out. And I appreciate you, brother, for having me on.
My pleasure.
And my position now, if I have not made it clear on my channel, just to clarify, is that I no longer believe in the gang lifestyle. If I ever did, I believe that it's silly, and I believe that Black people should come together. I do support peace and peace talks that have been somewhat taking place in the community. And that would be my message. My final message is to stay free, people, to stay out of prison at all costs, to avoid prison. And you avoid that by avoid committing crimes, and to come together. And if we can do that, then we'll see success as a community soon.
Gotcha. Well, there you have it, YouTube. This has been another edition of Concrete and Steel Chronicles. Again, thank you, Mr. Porter, for taking time out your busy day to come chop it up with me. It's been a pleasure. I could have went on for hours listening to you talk, bro. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So there you have it, YouTube. Until next time, this has been another edition of Concrete and Steel Chronicles. Be back at you soon with another edition.